good morning or evening, depending where you are. Okay, so I would have wanted to know how many of you know Spinoza and how many of you have a concept of Spinoza as being a pantheist. But I guess we can't have a show of hands. You may answer this question on the chat if you want to, but I will take into account that everybody knows the
Rana,
name.
we can have a show of hands. So if you're seeing their digital hands on the screen, you can take a look.
Okay, I guess this is too complicated. Okay, very familiar. I see that one in the chat. A bit. Okay, I will give you a short introduction about Spinoza the man, and also a short introduction about the time of his life, the 17th century. And yes, I only know God is nature of Spinoza. This is what most people normally know. And I think if you've heard of Spinoza, you probably heard him called a pantheist. And if you've heard of pantheism, you probably heard that pantheism is when somebody worships nature or sees God as appearing in the trees and the mountains and the rocks and everything that exists. So this lecture is going to shatter this concept, which is very wrong, if I may say so. So pantheism implies that God is the trees, the rocks, the physical things. But Spinoza, and here I dive right into it, has no separate things. According to Spinoza, nothing exists, as in no things exist. The only thing that does exist is existence, the substance of existence. And what is the substance? Substance of existence is what we will talk about in this lecture. I don't know how many of you speak Hebrew, but just a very short 2 words. I'm just going to use 2 words in Hebrew. Spinoza was, of course, a fluent Hebrew speaker. He was the son of crypto-Jews from Portugal who immigrated to Holland, to Amsterdam, after the Inquisition, during the time that the Netherlands were under occupation of Spain. And only after they arrived to the Jewish ghetto in Amsterdam, they returned to being Jews, normal Jews, outwardly Jewish. Spinoza was already born in Amsterdam in 1632, 17th century. And he studied at the yeshiva in the Jewish ghetto in Amsterdam, and he was actually a Jew until the age of 24. He was only excommunicated after that, after both of his parents died. And so he knew Hebrew, and he even wrote a book about Hebrew grammar. And the basic fundamental difference of definition that is the first point I want to speak about in this lecture is the difference between the 2 Hebrew words yekum and kiyum. Yekum means universe. Kiyum means existence. In Hebrew, it's just 2 letters crossed. Yekum, kiyum. Thank you, Shir. And in English, it's totally different, 2 different words, but of course, Spinoza didn't speak English. He wrote in Latin or in Dutch. He also knew Spanish and Hebrew, as we said. But he made this difference, this fundamental difference between the existence of the universe. It was not even a word in Spinoza's time, universe, but they used the word world, the existence of the world or the cosmological existence or existence of nature, everything that exists in nature, or the existence, of an order of existence, which is the subject that we will delve into today. So, for Spinoza, what is actually absolutely necessary in existence is not this universe or this world or the trees or the rocks or the mountains or the rivers, but the infinite substance, which is the eternal potentia. He actually uses the word potentia in Latin, which could be interpreted in two meanings: the potential of everything and the potency, the power, the potentia as in the power of existing, the power of being. Our universe would be a way that this infinite potentia is expressed or is. In principle, nothing in Spinoza's system forbids other configurations of being, other universes. He didn't speak about this cosmology. He didn't speak about a multiverse. These are all current terms. Or he didn't even speak of any kind of universe of a specific kind at all. But he spoke of logical order of how things come into existence or how things exist. Now, before I delve into that, I want to give you some background about who he was and how was his surrounding at the time and what he did. So Spinoza, the man, was born, as I said, in 1632. He died at 1677, died at age 44, and most people know that he ground lenses for a living. But he did not make eyeglasses. He ground lenses for microscopes and then later telescopes, and he was one of the leading mathematicians of his time, together with Leibniz, if you know the name, and following Descartes. So the lenses that Spinoza ground, he mathematically built them. He actually built microscopes and telescopes, the actual machines himself, and worked with others on that. And he had to be at the very pinnacle of the science of his day in a field called optics to be able to do that. So what he did was actually groundbreaking in mathematics and in geometry. Now I want to say a few things about geometry. Although we are talking about the nature of existence, in Spinoza's time and also before him in Descartes' time, the groundbreaking thought was to understand existence in geometrical terms. Now, what does geometry even mean? Let's just talk about several, 3 or 4 concepts in geometry. Geometry is the study of shape. Analytic geometry, also known as coordinate geometry or Cartesian geometry, because René Descartes is the one who started this line in mathematics, is the study of so Cartesian geometry or analytic geometry is the study of geometry using a coordinate system. A coordinate is a point in a field or a point in space. And now I will read to you the definition of Cartesian geometry. It is defining and representing geometric shapes in a numerical way, extracting numerical information from the shape's numerical definitions. So you can take a triangle or a circle and calculate by the points in it a formula. And from the formula, you can then build geometric shapes. Let's say you can understand from the formula the triangle or the circle or the bridge, etc., and vice versa. Now, why am I even talking about all this? Because this is the way that Spinoza would, in Hebrew we say Spinoza, but at that time, or in English, they would say, or you would say Spinoza. So excuse me if I move into Spinoza every once in a while. Also in German, they would say Spinoza. So this is the way Spinoza's mind was thinking, with coordinates, with shapes. Those shapes are what he calls bodies, but they are abstract bodies, not people's bodies, or a rock is a body, okay? A triangle is also a body. A tree is a certain shape. It will all come together. Just give me 2-3 more minutes about geometry before I connect everything to his way of thought. So, analytic geometry was invented by René Descartes, and he wrote a book called La Géométrie, Geometry, in 1637. It was then translated into Dutch later on, and Spinoza, as a young boy, I see that somebody asked me to not say the word ghetto in relation to the Jewish area of Amsterdam. Okay, point taken, but in this closed area where all the Jews in Amsterdam has lived at that time, it was very hard for a young boy like Spinoza to even reach a book like Descartes' Geometry. The only reason he did it, or he reached it, was because he went to study Latin with a person, a Dutch person, who lived outside of that area where the Jews lived. And he went to study Latin in order to be able to study the mathematics of his time, geometry. This geometry, this Cartesian geometry, was later on the foundation or the basis for calculus, what we know today as calculus. Calculus back then didn't exist, only later built on Descartes' analytic geometry. Leibniz, another mathematician and philosopher who lived at the same time or a few years later in Germany, started the study of calculus based on these mind-blowing inventions or discoveries. So back to when Spinoza was a youth in Amsterdam, he went to study Latin with Van der Enden, and Van der Enden introduced him to the geometry of Descartes. By understanding this abstract concept of being able to understand shapes in numerical data as numbers, this was the beginning of Spinoza's realization, which we, in our terms today, could describe as, it's an anachronism, okay, as understanding the world or everything that exists as a code. Understanding that everything that you see or feel or touch or hear could actually be transcribed into a formula. Later on, Spinoza read the book that Descartes wrote about his reasonings, his meditations, a book called Meditations, Descartes' Meditations, where the most famous sentence that you probably all know came from, I think, therefore I am. Cogito, ergo sum, in Latin. I'm sure you've all heard of it. And Spinoza, much later on, after he was excommunicated from the Jewish community in Amsterdam, many years after, wrote a correction, his own book, a correction to Descartes' thoughts. And there he wrote the basic correction. He also corrected his mathematics in the same book, or his geometry in the same book. But first of all, he corrected this fundamental basis for thought. Instead of saying, I think, therefore I am, which, as probably you all know, is what Descartes thought as the basic ground for understanding reality. If you want to strip all the thoughts that you might have about existence and just stay with the one basic thing that for sure is true and that you can't contradict in any other way, the one basic thought would be, if there is a thought, it means that there is a me. And then maybe I don't know anything about the existence of anything outside me. I can't trust my senses. I can only trust my logical thinking or the mathematics, the abstract thoughts. But if there is a thought, then there is my existence. If there is a thought in whatever my mind or within me or somewhere. So Spinoza's first correction to Descartes was, instead of saying cogito, I think, ergo, therefore, sum, I am, Spinoza corrected him to cogitas or cogitan ergo sum, which means if there is thought, who knows whose thought it is, if it is a thought of somebody at all, or not just a thought of the existence or the act of thinking existing somewhere. But if there is a possibility of thinking, which we are in a meditation, we are in a thinking mode, so there exists this possibility of thought, then it means that there is existence. So Spinoza's ground, the first step, the first substance of anything, the first thing that you can say for sure exists is the existence of thinking. Whose thinking it is, we can't know for sure. Who am I the one thinking this thought, or is this thought thinking me? As many times later on in philosophy people asked, we can't know for sure. What we can know for sure is that there is thought. And what is this thought? What is this possibility of perceiving, possibility of thinking, possibility of let's just say possibility of thinking. What is this possibility of thinking? It is a possibility of an order of things. What does it mean, an order of things? In mathematics or in geometry, we have a natural logical order. Let's say the order of the most basic numerical field, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc., etc. What is the order? 1, and then larger than 1 is 2. Larger than 2 is 3. Larger than 3 is 4. So we have coordinates, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And we have the relations between them. 2 is larger than 1. 2 is smaller than 3. We have a direction and we have an order and we have different relations. You can subtract, you can divide, you can multiply different relations. Something is greater than or smaller than or equal to. These are the relations. And there is a movement between those coordinates. There is a movement between 4 and 5. But the movement is not a movement in reality. It is a movement in logic. Same analogy. We can look at or not same, but different analogy, but the same idea. We can look at a score, a musical score, and the musical score has notes. The movement between one note to another note is an abstract movement. We can play it, and it can be a movement in reality. It can be music. But on the score, on the musical score, the relations between the notes that form the musical score are not actually moving. We just know that they should be moving, right? When you read a musical score, if you know how to read a musical score, you look at the notes and you can imagine the music. You don't need somebody to actually play it to understand the song. You understand it by understanding the relations between the notes. In the same way, in mathematics, in geometry, you can look at the formula, you can look at the coordinates, and if you know the logic of the relations between them, you can understand the movement, you can understand the formula, and you can also understand the shape. That was Descartes' invention or discovery, right? Do you invent mathematics or do you discover them? That's another basic philosophical question. So for Spinoza, the answer to that question would be both. All the logics in the world, all the coordinates, all the relations between them, all the formulas, all the shapes, all the bodies, they all exist as a possibility, as an abstract possibility in existence, in the potential, in the power of understanding of existence, which is the substance of existence. But they don't necessarily have to exist in actual reality. They exist as a potential. Now, I'll just have a drink of water, let you think about it before I go on to other examples of the same idea. So, let's say that, let's speak about the analogy of a book. Let's say that you're reading Spinoza's Ethics. Spinoza's Ethics is a very big book. I have it here in Hebrew. And I will just show you, maybe I can't really show you, but it's too bright, I think. But perhaps you can see, or perhaps you already know, that Spinoza's book of ethics was written in a geometrical outlay. I will answer this question soon. So it was written as proofs, postulates, definitions, according to, just like as if he was proving something in a geometrical way. There are definitions of things, then there are the propositions, and then there are the proofs. And this entire book, I go back to my analogy, this entire book is already written, right? It was already written before we started, let's say, reading it. All the words in it are already written, all the sentences are already written, but we move in time as we read it. We are making a motion of moving in time, reading word after word, line after line, proposition after proposition, proof after proof, and only when we reach the end of the book, we perhaps have the entire book in our mind, and perhaps we understand the entire book. So for us, in our human minds, we need time and movement in order to, we need a process in order to understand, in order to have knowledge, right? What Spinoza says is that in reality, the nature of existence, and in that sense, he was talking about God as the nature of existence, the order of existence, the potential of potentials, the logic of the order of everything that is. If you have the intellect of God, of the nature of existence, of this entire system, logical system, then you know everything at once. Then all the coordinates, all the possible relations between them, all the possible motions of reading this score, let's say, all the possible songs or melodies that you can combine from these notes, in God's mind, in the mind of the substance, exist. For a finite mind, as in the mind of a human, we are limited to one-track motion. Let's say, for those of you who know something about physics or mathematics, much later on, after Spinoza's time, somebody invented the term vector. A vector is the position or the position or the arrow of the coordinates. So let's say we have the number 4, or we have a certain point in the field. In which direction this point moves, this is its vector. So let's say I read a book, I start from page 1 and I move until the last page. This is my vector. We live in time and space, so we start as babies and we progress into old age, and this is our vector. Our vector is past, present, future. This is our motion. This is the way we move on the coordinates of existence. This is our order. But according to Spinoza, there are infinite orders. There are infinite coordinates. There are infinite possibilities of relationships between the infinite coordinates and those, not in his words, I'm using the modern terminology here, but there are infinite vectors, infinite ways or directions to read the relationships between the coordinates. This is all extremely abstract. So I will now answer this question. Is what you just described, entities and potential, influenced by Platonism? Very good question. When you hear Spinoza interpreted in such a way as I just did, and don't worry, very soon I will also interpret Spinoza in a much more traditional way. But when you hear this kind of interpretation, yes, if you have any background in philosophy, you will immediately ask, so is Spinoza a Platonist? Is he an idealist? So we live in an existence of ideals. Everything is abstract. Nothing is actual. There is this code and a logical order and all the shapes and the bodies and the things that we conceive or our perception shows us or makes us feel, that our senses perceive in existence, are in fact ideas, code, formulas, coordinates and their relationships, not actual things. If that is so, Spinoza is an idealist, right? No, because what Spinoza says, and here is the more conventional, traditional interpretation of Spinoza. What Spinoza said is that all of existence is at the same time, all of existence can be interpreted or can be perceived by at least two attributes or infinite attributes. The attributes that Spinoza talked about were thought and extension. These are not his inventions. He took that from Descartes and from all of the philosophy previous to them. And what does it mean? An attribute is the way Spinoza described an attribute or defined an attribute in the definitions of the first part of the ethics. An attribute, let me read it so I won't make a mistake. An attribute is what intellect perceives as constituting the essence of substance. So, substance, Spinoza defines as what has no other reason for its existence other than itself. What has no other reason for its existence other than itself? In Latin or in traditional philosophical concepts, it's called causa sui. The reason of itself, its self's reason, has no other reason or no other cause that causes it to exist. The substance of existence, which equals God, which equals nature, but it's not nature, the trees and the hills, but nature of things, the order of things, the nature of things, how things are. So this substance is what exists for no other reason other than itself. If you think about this definition, it's very hard, not to say impossible, to find anything that exists for no other reason other than itself except existence. It's called a tautological proposition. Only existence itself exists for no other reason other than itself. Everything else, in order to exist, needs existence. So even nothing or void or black hole or vacuum needs existence in order to exist. Spinoza didn't invent this thought. Okay, Parmenides maybe invented it when he says nothing doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is what is and not what isn't, because what isn't, what is, right? So Spinoza takes this from the ancient Greeks and he says the only thing that has no other reason for its existence is existence. Okay? Everything else needs existence in order to exist. But this is just his basic stepping stone. And then he said, okay, so this existence, this substance that is just existence, what can we say about it? How can we describe it? What is it actually? What is it, this, not a thing, but this existence that allows anything or everything to exist? And then Spinoza says we can describe this existence with two attributes out of infinite attributes. He actually proves this in the first chapter of the Ethics, that either one attribute exists or infinite attributes exist. But I'm not going to go into this proof here. But I want to focus on his definition of an attribute. What intellect perceives as constituting the essence of substance. So, intellect. What is intellect? We don't know. Does he speak about our intellect or about intellect in general or the intellect of existence? He doesn't say. He just says, what is an attribute? What can we say? What is a property of existence? What is a description of existence? What intellect perceives as constituting the essence of substance. When Spinoza speaks about intellect, he speaks about logic. He doesn't say whose logic is it. We don't know if we invented logic or if logic exists in existence and we just discovered it. Just like we don't know if we invented geometry or if the possibility of geometry exists in existence and we just discovered it. The same with calculus, which was discovered pretty much after Spinoza's time by Leibniz. Leibniz, by the way, came to visit Spinoza a short time before Spinoza died. When Leibniz came to visit him, Leibniz was about 30 years old and Spinoza was almost 44. He died at 44. But only after that, Leibniz invented calculus. So all these concepts and these ideas were just the beginning of science at that time of Descartes and then Spinoza. And this question of whether something is invented or discovered is the fundamental question that both these philosophers had to deal with, right? So Spinoza's answer would be, what intellect perceives as constituting the essence of substance is not an invention of the intellect, meaning the possibility to perceive something is an inherent possibility of existence. In this way, existence is a thinking existence. Okay, the existence, the potential, the power of existence, the power of being is the ability to perceive existence. But the other attribute is the attribute of what Descartes said, but was already a concept in philosophy even before that, of extension, the attribute of extension. The attribute of extension in space should be. And the attribute of extension in space is the physical attribute. Everything that extends in space. Any shape, any matter, anything. Okay? Spinoza uses the attribute of extension in space because it is a concept that already exists in philosophy. But he later on, and in one of his letters, he also wrote it very specifically, but also in the Ethics, he later on goes on to show that what exists as a thing, or in Spinozistic terms, a mode of existence, what exists as a mode or a thing in existence is not really a thing that is extending in space. It is just the intellect's understanding of the possibility out of the relations between these coordinates, out of the logical geometry, out of the logical way of reading existence and all its possibility, that matter comes into actual existence. So,
Rana, I'm just stopping you. There are a few questions around a specific issue. That if everything already exists or exists in potential, does that not mean that we're not inventing anything, but rather only discovering? Or how would you define that?
right. I would say that we are doing both at the same time, okay? We are not exactly inventing anything. All possibilities, in this way, Spinoza is a determinist, okay? Everything that can exist exists as a logical option, okay? It doesn't mean that everything that can exist exists in reality, in actual reality, but everything that can exist exists as an idea, as a logical possibility, as an optional relation. I will give a modern example to that. We all know that DNA is a specific code, right? Every being is created or comes into being according to a specific code. It's our DNA. A DNA is a specific instruction, a specific code that is a logical instruction. It's a mathematical instruction. It's like a code of zeros and ones that a computer can understand, okay? And the possibility of having my DNA is a logical, eternal possibility in existence, in mathematics, in logics. Okay, it doesn't mean that I had to come into being. It doesn't mean that every possibility of every DNA combination must come into being, but it means that every possibility of every DNA, every combination must exist as a possibility. It must exist as an eternal existing possibility. This is statistics. This is mathematics. Every combination that you can make between numbers, every relationship that can be between these numbers, every system or every order of reading these numbers, reading or any relations that can be between these numbers, necessarily exists in existence. It doesn't mean that it necessarily exists in somebody's mind, but it does necessarily exist in the mind or in the intellect of existence. So it's an abstract thing, but this abstract thing also comes into actuality in the actual existence. Another analogy. There is white light. All colors exist in the white light. It doesn't mean that necessarily all colors must be seen by someone or by something in order to exist in the white light. So this is where also Spinoza's field of what he did all day, that's what he did. He dealt with refractions of light when he ground lenses, right, for microscopes and telescopes. And actually, his last question in his last letter before he died, he asked one of his correspondents to tell him what are the news about refractions, what new findings in the field of refraction, if he could please tell him that. And he didn't actually live long enough to get the answer. But this is what, together with geometry and the actual field of actual lenses that change the way we perceive light, Spinoza understood this thing, that reality is actual, but it's also actually depending on the way we perceive it, in a way we could say today, on our vector, on the order in which we perceive it. And if we change our vector, let's say we take psychedelics and we totally change our vector, and suddenly our perception of everything around us is tilted, our vector is tilted. So he didn't use psychedelics, okay, but he used microscopes and telescopes. He didn't even know what he was seeing under the microscope. He just saw that what seemed like solid or what seemed like liquid is actually a lot of moving things. But germs were discovered or understood only 100 years after. So what he was able to understand and to see is that things are not as they seem. And that, okay, he didn't know about the electromagnetic field, but in his concepts and in his understanding of the time, he actually understood it, that it could be that everything is actually movement. And in this one unified movement, we can look at different parts of the movement and understand them as something, as a thing. And if we looked at movements differently, we would understand them as different things. And something that you are far away from looks like solid, but when you see it much larger, you understand that it's made out of many parts. And these are different lengths of movements And that was how he started to understand that everything is in relation to something and relative to something, and all different relations and relativity can build different existence. I mean, existence is one, but can build different ways of perceiving existence. So, for instance, in our times, we already know that that we can, in a way, cut out of light, out of electromagnetic light, we can cut microwaves, we can cut or use radio waves, the same way that in Spinoza's time, colors in the white light were understood. They are just different wavelengths. It was not understood as different wavelengths in his time. This is again using different terminology, but the idea was understood that something that appears as one can be actually perceived as separate things, and something that is perceived as separate things can be actually also perceived as one. So it doesn't mean that everything is just an idea. It also exists as actuality. It means that according to that everything is according to a logical order of existence. Also the actuality. When Spinoza talked about the two attributes in a very interesting. Most people would say it like the traditional way of interpreting Spinoza is to say, somebody asks, "Is this relativity?" Yes, this is the foundation of Einstein's relativity. Einstein always said that he was a Spinozist, and it's not because he was a pantheist. It was because he understood the nature of things, the logical nature of the relations between, for no better word, coordinates in existence.
Rana, I'm interrupting you for a moment because we're getting short on time and I have a lot of amazing questions piling up here, which I think will also help kind of bring things together. So is it okay that I start jumping in with questions?
Questions are great.
Okay, so there were questions here about the relationship between Spinoza. I'm going to give you three and you choose which of them you get to answer. Between his thought and string theory, quantum physics, and Kabbalah.
Okay,
Go ahead.
So I will start with Kabbalah, because for me that is also very interesting, the relationship between Spinoza and Kabbalah. I think it's actually pretty amazing, and also we know today that Spinoza read Rabbi Kreskas and took some ideas from him. So for sure, when you read Etz Chaim, if you know it, or Kabbalah Lurianit, I'm not even sure how to say that in English.
Lurian Kabbalah.
Okay. There are very interesting things that both of these lines of thought are actually very similar in. For instance, the first thing would be the definition of God as an infinite light, right? The definition of God as an infinite light, or Ein Sof, and the talk in Lurian in Kabbalah about hitabut, thickening. Infinite light thickens into being a thing, right? Matter is not different than light, it is just condensed light. And also there is the talk about tzimtzum, an infinite light withdraws. Tzimtzum, it leaves some trace. So we can talk about, we can relate it to a mathematical blueprint, or let's say like this, we can make an analogy between substance and light, attributes or modes and hitabut and thickenings. And we can say that, let's say, the coordinates of Cartesian geometry are actually thickenings. Okay, we can say, let's say that I am a coordinate. I think that nowadays we would say that I am a conglomerate of billions of coordinates, or billions of thickenings, because every atom in my body, or every particle is a coordinate. Okay, me all together, I'm one big itabut, one big thickening of many coordinates, let's say. And Spinoza would talk about, or did talk about, an order of existence. So in his order of existence, things that exist in a stronger way, it's not an order in time, or it's not an order, it's not a hierarchy, it's just a hierarchy of strength of existence. Things that exist more strongly, or they are more fundamental to existence, have a stronger existence. So their thickening, you could say, is stronger. For instance, the two basic modes of existence, the infinite modes of existence, Spinoza called them, are movement and rest. So you could say that, and also Spinoza said that the more something has an ability to move, the more existence it has. An ability to move would not just be an ability to move in space, but also an ability to move in intellect, which are the two sides of the same thing, okay? Two attributes of the same thing. It's just different descriptions that we give to existence, the thought and the matter, but it's really a description of the same coordinate, or the same area of existence. Let's say in this area of existence, has much more ability to move in every way, physically and mentally, than this area of existence. Okay, so this area of existence is higher in the hierarchy of the strength of existence than this one. And actually, that's an amazing question, because it brings us exactly to the gist of Spinoza's ethics, which is, the more of an understanding you have, or something has, the more existence it has. And this is another important term that maybe he took from the Kabbalah, which is dvekut. How do I translate dvekut? I didn't prepare that one ahead.
Dvekut is like closeness or clinging to, and in Hebrew,
yeah,
like
close. In Kabbalah, what is dvekut? It's dvekut beHashem. Like when you are like merging with God, or merging with, in Spinozistic terms, merging with the intellect of existence. The more you know of existence, and the more you understand this logical order, the more you know mathematics, the more you know physics, the more you understand how everything really is, and how everything can be, let's say, created, but it's not in fact created, right? It's just the potential is already there. The actuality of it is created, let's say. The potential is eternal. The relations are eternal. We didn't create microwaves, okay? We just understood the potential of microwaves. We didn't create radio waves. We understood this potential. We didn't create the string theory. We understood this potential in existence. This potential, if something can exist in potential, then it must exist in potential. If there is no logical, if there is nothing logical that prevents an order or a relation to exist, then it must exist, even if we didn't discover it yet. Okay.
Rana, we're on our time, and I do want to. We'll go over time a little more because I do want to give time for a few more questions, and I'll transition for a moment to a few questions that came in about his excommunication. So one was that he was excommunicated actually before most of his books even came out. So what was it that caused this excommunication, and why in such a intense way?
So that's actually a very interesting thing to discover. So Spinoza's father died before he was excommunicated, and he was a merchant. He was for a time very successful, but then because of the war that went on at that time, he lost his fleet, and he actually lost a lot of money, and he remained in debt. And since Spinoza's elder brother also died shortly after or before, I don't remember right now, I think after his father, Spinoza inherited all this debt. And he had no means of paying for it. At that time, he was around 22, 23, 24, and he was already studying Latin, and he was already studying geometry, and he already started with all these questions, and he was annoying the yeshiva people with all of his questions. And then he inherited this debt, and instead of dealing with it inside the Jewish community in Amsterdam, he went to the authorities of the municipality of Amsterdam and asked them to relieve him from his debt. The Jewish community did not like this at all, that he went with an inside issue to an outside authority. This, combined with the fact that he was asking too many questions, that he was studying Latin and geometry, that he was not a normal yeshiva bucher who just studied Gemara and went in the straight way of studying Jewish studies, but he was influenced by outside ideas. Also, his Latin teacher was one of the first atheists in the Netherlands. He was later on killed for that, executed for that, and for sure we know that Spinoza at that time was already becoming a sort of an atheist. Okay, he believed in an intellectual or a potential of intellect of the existence. He was not exactly extremely atheist, but he was enough of an atheist because according to his understanding of this eternal logical order, it was a logical order without a will or without a program relating to humans. It was perhaps a program as far as an order, but not a program that something or somebody or some entity programmed. It's just the logical order of things. It is as it is. So it's not an entity with a will or a plan in that sense, or something that responds to mitzvahs or any of those concepts of religion. So the combination of going outside of the Jewish community to the Amsterdam municipality and bringing up all these ideas, that was the reason for his excommunication.
Thank you, Rana. We're ask still yet another question. I know we're going over time, but just this one also came up a lot. If there's a way you can say, so why are you saying he's not a pantheist? Or is he a pantheist? Like, what is your take on that?
maybe that's a good way to finish this circle. So a pantheist would be someone who believes that there is an entity of God in the actual nature. But if you think of everything I've very quickly now explained, the logical order of things, the geometrical potentia or potentiality or power of being that Spinoza is describing is not even real actual nature as we see it. I mean, that was his whole point, was that nature as we see it, as the trees or the stones or the water, is not actually trees or stone or water at all. In actuality, it is a substance of logical relations. So how can, only our finite minds perceive this with our senses as the regular way we describe nature. That is what Spinoza was saying, that if we would understand, and this is what he wants to encourage us to do, to deepen our understanding, for this dvikut to happen, to deepen our understanding of what reality actually is. And what reality actually is a relationship between coordinates in a geometrical sense of the way. And only we perceive it as flesh, water, liquid, matter, thought, language, sound, or any other kind of wave or movement. But in reality, in actual reality, if we had the mind or the intellect of existence itself, we would not perceive any of this nature. We would not perceive time. We would not perceive space. We would know everything at once, all the coordinates and all the relationships at once. And this entire project or this entire song that can be read from these notes will collapse back to the notes.
Rana, thank you so much. I will echo some people there. I have many chat conversations coming in all cap letters. Will a recording of this mind-opening lecture be available, please? So the answer is yes. If all of you feel like myself, that my mind is like looking for coordinates and needs to listen to all of this again to make it make sense. Yes, we will be sending the recording for you to listen, and we will make sure to send follow-up links. Rana, thank you. It's like I feel I'm woken up in like weird ways my mind wasn't used to moving for a while.
Optimistic and nice, and which would be to encourage everybody, as Spinoza did, to go out and think of all other songs that we can perceive from these notes that we are a part of.
Beautiful. So a moment before you continue in front of the screen, maybe it's a good time to go out and see the world. Let it move us in different ways. And yes, we will be sending recordings. Rana, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.